Imagine a time long, long ago when a mighty empire stretched across much of the world we know today. This was the Roman Empire, a place of grand buildings, brave soldiers, and clever leaders. It was a time of great power, where Roman laws and Roman ways were spread far and wide. But with all that power came a very strict way of life. The Romans believed in order and obedience above all else. If you followed the rules, life could be good. If you didn't, things could get very, very bad. The Roman Empire was not just strong. It was also known for its incredibly harsh punishments. When someone broke the law, especially a serious one, the consequences were often terrifying. These were not simple fines or a slap on the wrist. No, the Romans had ways of punishing people that were meant to strike fear into everyone's hearts. They wanted to make sure that no one would ever think about doing something wrong again. These punishments were not hidden away. In fact, many of them were performed in front of crowds of people. It was a grim show, a public lesson for all to see. The rulers wanted everyone to understand that their power was absolute, and that breaking the rules would lead to a fate worse than anything they could imagine. This was the dark side of the mighty Roman Empire, a place where justice could be swift and incredibly cruel. We're going to look at some of the most horrific ways the Romans executed people, showing just how different their world was from ours. The Romans didn't just punish people in secret. No, they made sure everyone knew about it. Imagine a huge theater, not for plays, but for something much darker. People would gather, sometimes by the thousands, to watch as criminals face their doom. These events were like a terrible show, put on to send a clear message: follow the rules or suffer a horrible end. These public shows of punishment weren't just about making criminals pay for their wrongs. They were a powerful tool for the Roman leaders. They wanted to keep everyone in line, to make sure no one dared to challenge their power or break their laws. When people saw someone being punished in a terrible way, it made them think twice about doing anything wrong themselves. It was a way to control the people, not just with laws, but with fear. Think of it like a very strict parent who punishes one child very loudly to make sure the other children behave. The Romans used fear to keep their vast empire working smoothly. The more gruesome the punishment, the more impact it had on the watching crowd. These spectacles taught everyone that the Roman government was strong and would not stand for disobedience. They made sure everyone understood that breaking the law was not just a mistake. It was an act against the whole empire, and the price for it was incredibly high. These weren't just punishments. They were terrifying lessons for the entire population. Among the many terrible ways the Romans punished people, one stands out as especially cruel: crucifixion. You might have heard of it. This was not a quick or easy death. Instead, it was a slow, agonizing process designed to inflict the maximum amount of pain and humiliation. Imagine being taken to a public place, often outside a city gate or along a busy road, where a large wooden cross stood. Your hands and feet would be nailed or tied to this cross. Then, the cross would be lifted up, leaving you hanging there, exposed for all to see. The pain would be immense, but that was just the beginning. Crucifixion didn't kill a person quickly. Instead, it was a prolonged torment. People would hang on the cross for hours, sometimes even days, before finally dying. Every breath would be a struggle. Every movement would cause searing pain. They would suffer from thirst, hunger, and the hot sun or cold night. It was a death caused by exhaustion, suffocation, and shock. This gruesome punishment was often used for the worst criminals, like runaway slaves, pirates, or those who dared to rebel against the mighty Roman Empire. It was a powerful message to anyone thinking about defying Roman rule. This could be your fate. The sight of crucified bodies lined up along roads was a chilling reminder of Rome's power and its intolerance for disobedience. It was a terror meant to keep the peace by making sure everyone knew the dreadful cost of going against the empire. If crucifixion sounds terrible, the Romans had other ways to make people suffer and die that were just as horrifying or even worse. One such punishment was called damnatio ad bestias, which means condemnation to beasts. This was not a quiet, private affair. It was a huge show in the grand arenas, like the famous Colosseum. Imagine a large, sandy arena, packed with thousands of shouting people. In the center, there might be a few helpless people, perhaps criminals or prisoners of war. Then, huge gates would open, and out would burst wild animals. These weren't just any animals. They were often fierce lions, hungry bears, or even dangerous leopards, specially brought from faraway lands for these gruesome events. The condemned people would have no weapons, no way to fight back. Their fate was sealed. The animals, often starved to make them more aggressive, would attack. The crowd would cheer and shout, watching as the poor victims were torn apart. This was considered entertainment for the Roman people, a thrilling and bloody spectacle. Damnatio ad bestias was more than just a way to kill someone. It was a way to dehumanize them, to make them seem less than human, worthy only of being food for beasts. It was meant to be a public display of power, showing that Rome could even command the wildest creatures to do its bidding. This kind of execution was especially used for those who were seen as enemies of the state or those who committed crimes that greatly offended Roman society. It was a terrifying reminder of what awaited anyone who dared to challenge the might of Rome or its laws. As if being torn apart by wild animals wasn't enough to show Rome's terrifying power, another truly awful punishment was burning alive. This method was saved for crimes that the Romans considered especially terrible, often those that went against their gods or the very heart of the state. It was a punishment that aimed to cleanse society of what they saw as great evils. Imagine the horror: a person tied to a stake, surrounded by dry wood and other things that would burn quickly. A crowd would gather, drawn by the macabre spectacle. Then, fire would be set to the kindling. The flames would slowly grow, licking at the edges of the wood, before engulfing the condemned person. The pain would be beyond imagining, a searing, all-consuming agony that would last until life finally left the body. This form of execution was sometimes used for Christians during times when they were persecuted. The Romans saw Christians as a threat because they refused to worship the Roman gods or the emperor, which was seen as an act against the state itself. By burning them alive, the Romans hoped to not only punish them, but also to erase their very existence and deter others from joining their faith. Burning alive was a deeply symbolic punishment. Fire was seen as a purifying force, and using it in an execution was meant to show that the condemned person's actions were so evil they needed to be completely wiped away. It was a terrifying display, meant to instill absolute terror and remind everyone of the sacredness of Roman traditions and the unyielding authority of the state. It served as a dire warning against religious defiance or treason, showcasing the empire's willingness to use the most extreme methods to maintain control. While many Roman punishments were drawn out and incredibly painful, there was one method that, though still brutal, offered a quicker end: decapitation. This was the act of cutting off a person's head. Unlike crucifixion or being fed to beasts, which were often reserved for common criminals or non-Romans, decapitation was usually considered a more honorable way to die, often given to Roman citizens of higher standing. Imagine a block of wood set up in a public square. The condemned person, perhaps a senator who plotted against the emperor or a general who failed in battle, would be brought forward. They would kneel or lie with their neck placed upon the block. Then, with a swift, strong blow of an axe or a sword, their head would be severed from their body. The act itself was still gruesome, but the death was nearly instant, unlike the slow torture of other methods. This distinction in punishment highlights how important being a Roman citizen was. Even in death, there was a hierarchy. Roman citizens, especially those from noble families, were protected from the most humiliating and drawn-out forms of execution. Decapitation, while certainly a terrible fate, allowed for a measure of dignity, or at least a quicker end, compared to the prolonged suffering of others. It showed that even if you broke the law, your status as a Roman citizen still offered some small difference in how your life ended. It was a reminder that even in their severity, the Romans maintained a complex system of laws and social order, even in the face of death. While decapitation offered a quicker end for some, the Romans also invented punishments that were not only painful, but deeply strange and symbolic. One of the most bizarre and cruel was called pina culiae, which means punishment of the sack. This terrible fate was specifically for those who committed one of the most unthinkable crimes, killing a parent. Imagine being tightly sewn into a large leather sack. But you wouldn't be alone in there. Inside the sack with you, the Romans would also place a live dog, a rooster, a viper, a type of snake, and a monkey. Each animal was chosen for a reason. The dog for its loyalty, the rooster for waking the family, the snake for its treachery, and the monkey because it looked somewhat like a person but was wild. It was meant to show how unnatural and beastly the crime of killing a parent was. Once everyone was inside the sack, it would be sewn shut. Then this living, squirming, screaming bag would be thrown into a river or the sea. The condemned person would drown, but not before being scratched, bitten, and pecked by the terrified animals trapped inside with them. It was a horrifying way to die, combining suffocation with terror and injury. This punishment was extremely rare because the crime it addressed, parricide, killing a parent, was considered one of the worst possible acts in Roman society. It went against the very foundation of family and respect, which were so important to the Romans. Pina culiae was meant to show that such an unnatural crime would be met with an equally unnatural and utterly terrifying punishment, one that erased the very idea of a human burial and left the body to the waters, disgraced forever. It was a powerful message about the sacredness of family bonds. When we think of the Roman Empire, many people picture gladiators fighting in grand arenas. These gladiatorial games were indeed a popular form of entertainment, where trained fighters, often slaves or prisoners of war, battled each other or wild animals. But sometimes, these games weren't just about sport. They became another grim stage for Roman executions. Condemned criminals, who were deemed unworthy of a quicker death or even of being thrown to beasts in a straightforward manner, might find themselves forced into the arena as part of the gladiatorial show. These people were often called noxii or damnati, meaning guilty ones or condemned. They were not trained gladiators, skilled in combat, and with a chance to win freedom. Instead, they were often poorly armed, if at all, and sent into impossible fights. Imagine a criminal, perhaps armed with only a dull wooden sword, facing a fully trained gladiator with shining armor and sharp weapons. Or perhaps they were put into a battle with several other untrained criminals, all fighting to the death, not for glory, but simply because they were forced to. The outcome was almost always certain death. These spectacles served a dual purpose for the Romans. They provided thrilling entertainment for the masses, satisfying their taste for blood and drama. At the same time, they were a very public way to get rid of criminals, turning their deaths into a grand, terrifying lesson for anyone watching. It blurred the line between entertainment and execution, showing how cheaply human life could be valued when it came to maintaining Roman law and order. The roaring crowd would watch as these condemned individuals fought a losing battle, their lives ending not as heroes, but as a warning. Beyond the brutal spectacles in the arena, Rome reserved a particularly chilling punishment for a very specific type of offender, the Vestal Virgins. These women held a deeply important and sacred role in Roman society. They were priestesses who guarded the eternal flame of Vesta, the goddess of the hearth, a flame believed to protect Rome itself. Their vows included remaining pure and unmarried for 30 years. If a Vestal virgin broke her vow of purity, it was seen as a terrible crime against the gods and the state, threatening Rome's safety. For this grave offense, the punishment was not a quick death by sword or a public mauling by beasts. Instead, it was live burial. This was a terrifying, slow death designed to avoid spilling the sacred blood of a Vestal virgin, yet still ensure her demise. Imagine a dark, underground chamber dug deep into the earth. The Vestal virgin, dressed in the garments of a dead person, would be led to this chamber. She wouldn't be dragged. Instead, she would be carried on a covered litter, as if she were already a corpse being taken to her grave. Inside the chamber, there would be a small lamp, a bit of bread, some water, and milk. These meager provisions were meant to suggest that she wasn't truly executed by the state, but rather that the gods had taken her, and she had simply been given a chance to survive. Once inside, the entrance to the chamber would be sealed with earth, stone, and rubble. The Vestal Virgin would be left alone in the darkness, with only her thoughts and the terrifying knowledge that she was trapped. She would slowly starve or suffocate, dying a lonely and agonizing death. This rare but deeply symbolic punishment served as an extreme warning, underscoring the immense importance of religious purity and duty in Roman life and the terrible consequences of failing them. Thinking about all these terrible ways people were put to death, it's clear that these acts had a huge effect on the Roman people. It wasn't just about punishing criminals. It was about shaping how everyone in the empire thought and behaved. These executions created a deep sense of fear. Imagine living in a city where, on any given day, you might see someone being crucified by the roadside or hear about a criminal being thrown to wild beasts in the arena. You'd likely walk by the forum and see a fresh head on a spike or a chamber where a Vestal Virgin was just buried alive. These sights and stories would fill your mind with a constant warning. Every time you thought about doing something against the law, a picture of these horrors would flash in your head. This constant fear was exactly what the Roman leaders wanted. They knew that a scared population was an obedient population. When people are afraid of the consequences, they are less likely to rebel, less likely to question authority, and more likely to follow rules, even if they don't fully agree with them. These public displays of death were like a powerful, silent language spoken by the empire. Obey, or this could be you. It made people very careful about what they said and did. It made them respect, or at least pretend to respect, the power of the emperor and the Roman gods. The psychological impact was immense, turning citizens into subjects who understood the high price of disobedience. The Roman Empire, with all its grandeur, was built not just on laws and armies, but also on the chilling power of public terror. These horrifying executions weren't just random acts of cruelty. They were carefully chosen tools, especially by the emperors themselves. Each emperor, from the powerful Augustus to the mad Caligula and the strict Diocletian, understood that how they punished people was a direct way to show their immense power and control over everyone in the empire. A new emperor, eager to show he was strong and not to be trifled with, might order a wave of brutal public executions for minor offenses. This would quickly establish his authority and remind everyone who was in charge. If there was a rebellion in a far-off land, the emperor might order a mass crucifixion of the rebels, not just to punish them, but to send a chilling message to anyone else thinking of defying Rome. The sight of hundreds of bodies on crosses would be a powerful deterrent. Some emperors, like Nero, were known for their particularly cruel and imaginative punishments, often targeting groups they disliked, such as Christians. These acts were not just about justice. They were about making a grand, terrifying statement. By choosing the most agonizing and public forms of death, an emperor could show that his word was law and that he held the power of life and death over every single person in his vast domain. Even the choice of execution methods spoke volumes. Decapitation for a high-ranking citizen, while still a death sentence, acknowledged their status. But for a slave or a rebel, it was the prolonged agony of the cross or the horror of the beasts. This demonstrated the emperor's ability to not only enforce laws, but also to define social order through the very act of punishment. The executions were, in essence, a grim performance, directed by the emperor to remind everyone of his absolute rule. As we have explored, the Roman Empire, for all its grand achievements in building, law, and military strength, also had a very dark and brutal side. The ways they chose to punish those who broke their laws were often incredibly cruel and designed to cause the most pain and fear possible. From the slow agony of crucifixion to being torn apart by wild animals, from being burned alive to the strange terror of the punishment of the sack, these methods were meant to shock and control. These weren't just random acts of violence. Each terrifying execution was a deliberate act, a public show put on by the powerful Roman leaders and emperors. They used these gruesome displays to show everyone their absolute power. They wanted to make sure that no one would dare to go against them, to keep the vast empire in order through fear and obedience. The message was clear: follow the rules, or face a fate worse than you can imagine. Looking back, these horrific methods of execution remind us just how different life was long, long ago. Our world today has laws and punishments, but we no longer see such public spectacles of suffering, nor do we use such extreme methods to scare people into line. The Roman Empire's story is a powerful lesson in history, showing us both the heights of human achievement and the depths of human cruelty, reminding us how much our ideas of justice and human rights have changed over thousands of years. It was a world where power was everything, and the cost of defying it was unimaginably high.